Oh my goodness, Facebook, come on, I haven't even touched my phone. Okay. You know what, I think I just figured it out. Or maybe I didn't just figure it out. I didn't even get up and touch the phone. Somebody please tell me whether this is horizontal or vertical. That would make me feel so good. I may or may not be able to read your comments. I don't have my tablet set up in here today because I'm wanting to get to hustling on these projects. I've got my knobs finished. Let's see if I can get that up there close enough to you. I'm gonna sit and work. I don't ever like sit and work, but they have just enough of a finish here and there to be naturally worn looking. And we'll put those back on hopefully tomorrow morning. And let's see if I can sit back on this stool that I ripped off from my husband's shop. I don't understand it. It's got some wheels under the bottom, but whenever you sit on it, it pressures down on the wheels and then it doesn't want to roll. It's kind of crazy. But anyway, remember I made this wax the other day? Well, I fiddle-farted with it since then. It's a little darker of a mocha color now. And what I put in it then, and I put some in this little jar so it would be easy to get to. This jar fits my brush perfectly. This is DIY wax with faded burlap, weathered wood, and layered chocolate mixed in to end up with something that looks semi-tan in the long run. And then what I'm going to use in the grooves is, and if I need it, I've got a tad of the Best Dang Wax in brown. And you know, now and then sometimes there's going to be a space that doesn't take as much wax or doesn't take as much color or doesn't take color the same, and you know, I will do what I have to when I have to. This is the grunge gray. I'm going to put that in the crevices here, and then I've got my tools together, but I wanted to show you a couple of other things. We've got the wax brushes, and obviously I'll be using that, but in these grooves when I'm applying the gray wax, this is the gray wax, it's just a regular flat painting artist brush, they call it. And if I needed it and I didn't have a waxing brush, this is what I would use. This was probably 97 cents at Lowe's, and I cut those tips out of it because that's the one I used for stenciling the other day. But you could also, that's now got stiff enough bristles that it could be used for waxing. And this French round is good for getting in crevices and details and under stuff that may be not as easy to get to. So that's all my tools I've got out. You don't have to have any or all of them, but what I'm going to do, and I hope I have this turned around to where you can see a bit. Let me see if I can pull it a little closer. That didn't help at all, did it? Okay, well, I'm working on the surface here, and I believe even if, because it's all clear, I mean light colored, you can't see all the grooves as much from that distance. You're going to be able to see them once I start putting this on it. And what I'm doing is applying what I want to be darkest, what I want to, you know, show up the most afterward first, so that it has a little bit of a longer time to seep in. So I know you'll catch part of this, and then the details of this table will show up more once this is in there. You don't want this to be too long, and what I would normally do would be put this on the top first like I'm doing now, and then go underneath and do, you know, get it on all the legs and everything, and then come back up and start immediately taking it off of the top. But what I'm going to do in this instance is, and see, there was a detail, and I'm wanting it to be good and in those details. So I'm going back through, and anywhere I see where they beat this thing up a little bit to try to make it look more distressed, I'm putting this gray in there. Anywhere there's a seam or a crevice or what's called a wormhole, which is really just a nail hole, but they call it a wormhole. So if this was naturally wormy distressed or naturally wholly distressed wood, those would be wormholes. I don't know if you remember, what was his name from This Old House? Was that Norm Abrams? I don't remember what his name is right now. But anyways, he he loved wormy wood. It has a lot of character and a lot of detail, and when you're, you know, not with painted wood necessarily, but with when you're staining a fresh piece of wood, he really, I think it was wormy hickory that he liked so much. Or was that Bob Vila? That was Bob Vila, wasn't it? Anyway, that was our first reality TV, wasn't it? On Bob Vila. I am trying to work a little bit in a hurry, and I don't know whether it's still very meditative. It's not, you know, stressing me out or anything. So this is the nice part of painting. And this, I have control over where I put this stuff. I have control over how long I leave it on here. But I don't have control over what it's going to look like when it's done. That's the natural part of the pigments that are in the waxes and the crevices and the details in the paint, and how the top coat penetrated. There's so many different things, so I'm as surprised as anybody else at the end. You know, you can get an indication of what products to use and where to put them and all that kind of stuff. But what it actually looks like when it's done is a surprise to us all. All you can do is say, oh yeah, I intended that. That is exactly what I wanted. Okay, so I'm done with the gray. Set that aside. And grab some of this custom blend. See, when you put them side by side, this one looks sort of gray, but when you put them side by side, you can tell it's a lot more, there's a lot more of a taupey kind of a brown tone to it. And we're going to apply that with the big old brush. See how that fits in there? That just pleases me beyond what something like that ought to please a person. Okay. And can you see how that's applying? I'm going to do it over here so you can see a little bit more. I'm not wanting that gray that I put where the wormy holes were and things like that to look splotchy. We're not going for a leopard print here. So I'm wanting to get over those areas pretty quick and sort of erase what of those would be floating on the top and push them farther down into the crevices of the table, so that whenever we're done, hopefully the result as planned will be that those holes are darker than the top of the table. And the trick here that comes from a little bit of experience is, how long do you leave this on here before you start wiping it off? And that is just absolutely, there is no rule of thumb. You want it to start drying a little bit, to start glazing over a little bit, but you don't want it to dry completely to where you're halfway scrubbing off the paint finish trying to get it off. But if you start too soon taking it off while the wax is still too wet, it's going to remove so much of the color that will not have had the opportunity to do its job of staining the finish, which is what your goal is. And I'm applying this very liberally right now. I may or may not would apply it that liberally was I not jacking my jaw so much. But I am applying it pretty liberally because I do want to make sure that there is some of the tan tone on this white part and not just the gray. But I'm finished with that part now. I'm also going to go back over it real quick with my same brush in a circular motion, so there aren't as many finished areas that are straight edges. And see, that pulls up a little bit of that gray, but you know, it's not like it's a, you know, elementary school coloring book. We're not wanting it to be perfect, perfectly outlined lines. We're wanting it to look more natural and just old and aged, and like it used to be white, and it sat out in somebody's barn for a long time and got dusty in somebody's mama's old kitchen or something like that, and that it naturally aged in that fashion over the last 100 years. That's a lot to expect of a piece of furniture. Okay, let's see if I can turn it around. I'm not going to do the big one because I've got all my junk sitting on it right now. Let's see if I can turn this, and we'll do this one. We're going to do the same exact thing. Let's see if I can. You can see a little better. This one doesn't have as much, this was a different table. It didn't originally belong with this set, but it was the same color and enough of a similar style, and with these individual, what looks to be individual boards on top. It's actually cuts that were put in it. You know, if somebody wasn't being picky and not a furniture person, they wouldn't know that it didn't come together. But one of the things, whenever you're looking at it really close, that is a difference is there's not, this one has very few wormholes and no chain marks and all the other stuff that they beat furniture up with to make it look old. So this one's not going to have quite as much. It doesn't, the other one has some little nooks down on every other panel to make it look like it was split wood there, because old wood, when it gets dry, if you bring it in from the inside before it's all the way dry, which is how they used to have to do things because they didn't have kiln dryers, then eventually it would warp a little and split a little and crack a little as it aged, and that still happens today if you don't have kiln dried wood. So that's why you can't go, you know, just buy your wood from the guy with the sawmill, which would be us, or a guy in Pitkin or whatever. Because if you bring that inside, once, if it's not been kiln dried and then acclimated to being indoors, what's going to happen is it's going to, those are called checks. They're actually called checks. The little splits that come in the wood are called checks. It's going to check and warp and split and not look pretty. It's going to try to pull itself out of the screw holes. It's going to not look like the pretty distress table that you buy at the store. It's a totally different ball game there. But anyways, those are called checks, and you don't want that. You don't want your piece falling apart. So that's why you can't use that wood for building furniture or cabinetry or indoor things unless it has had the moisture removed down to whatever the percentage is for that particular species of wood through kiln drying, and then being reacclimated out of the kiln dryer, which is going to take it down to say 4% moisture depending on the kind of wood. And then it has to, you know, your house is air conditioned and it has a different level of moisture in it. So that's why a lot of times you'll see craftsmen bring the flooring or bring the wood for the cabinetry and bring those things into the house and just leave them sitting there, and you're thinking, why in the world don't they just get to work? Why would they bring that in and just sit it there for 2 weeks? Well, it's because they're doing what a real craftsman would do, and they're allowing the wood to acclimate to your surroundings, the temperature that you keep your house in, and then it will absorb some moisture from the atmosphere in the environment it's going to spend eternity in, and become acclimated to that. So before they start cutting it and putting nail holes and screw holes and things in it that may tighten and warp it later as more moisture is drawn out or more likely sucked back into the dried wood, they wait until it's... Hey, sorry about that. I had a telephone call. My little granddaughter doesn't feel good, and she's been sick for about a week, and now they believe it's pneumonia, so she's gone to get some chest x-rays. So Prayers, if you believe in them, would be appreciated. Okay, let's see how dry this is. And we were talking, that's pretty dry. We were talking about the wood anyway. When you have a carpenter or a craftsman who comes to your house and they leave the stuff and don't come back for days, they're actually doing a better job than the person who would just come in there and try to finish it up and get your money and go home and leave you 6-8 months down the line with warped cabinetry and furniture and things like that. Okay, so let's see, what part can you see the best? Then all you do is just take your rag, and again, I wish I had my terry cloth rags in here with me. I don't. I'm going to use this washcloth, and I'm just going to buff in a circle. And whether you buff hard or whether you buff soft depends on how much at that time of the finish that you're going to remove. I guess that's pretty common sense, but you want to be pretty consistent with the firmness of your pressure, and I'm doing this like this. If I was pushing hard with these 2 fingers, I would be leaving 2 stripes on there. So you can't do that either. So, and you know, after every little while, obviously you'll have to turn your rag because you'll see that it's not picking up as much as it did before. See, this has sat on there now a little bit longer than this, and I think you can see that, how much lighter this part of it is than this part of it. So this now has been a little longer, so I'll have to rub a little harder. There we go. And I'm going in a circular motion, trying not to leave too much in the way of straight lines. This is the point where you decide I could scrub this all the way back off until it was nearly as white as this if I wanted only a faint amount in there. I brought this tiny little rag because I probably will go in those, and this is just where I cut one up, probably will go in these crevices just a little bit so that it isn't too stark of gray, but it's going to more accentuate the panels and the difference in the sizes of the panels and the panels being there because of the dark being through it. So we do want the dark there, but we're not wanting it to have that, you know, hey, I traced it with my crayon look. So trying to get around these edges really good. I'm not going up into the crevices a whole lot. I'm still wanting that to sit there a tad longer. Boy, that's pretty. Okay. I don't want to wipe it out too much, so this is where you have to really be careful and go with just your gut. Just go with your gut, and it'll tell you if you go too far and you get too much out. You can always just go right over there and get your little brush and put a little more back in and start this over. This in the details here. You would have to be a little more careful about coming out of the crevices and having the stripes show outside of that, but because you're not going to have the big brush to erase it with some of the tan afterward. But it, you know, as you can see, this is not rocket science. You know, I'm not doing anything spectacular here that others couldn't do, but it is time consuming. I probably cut myself off quite a few hours of how long I'm actually spending on this versus how much time I estimated I was going to spend on this. And that was due to the extra coats of base coat that needed to go on, or primer that needed to go on, because I quoted without seeing the original piece. Okay, I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to come back and buff these more, but I want the amount of color that's on here now to stay on here. Can you see the difference between the two, because this table started out that color. So that's the difference between the two once the first, you know, once the coat of wax is on there. Like I said, I could scrub this more and get more off, but then it's not going to have any tan look to it at all. And I know that she wanted some, and the gray is showing through exactly how the gray is supposed to show through. So I'm very happy with that. But I would just have to buff a little harder, and I can come back and try to buff this to a little bit of a shine, but I want to let it dry for at least 6 or 8 hours before I do that. So now I'm going to turn around here and do the same thing to this one. Same procedure. See there, it's about dry. A little bit harder to wipe off because it's dried on there a little bit longer. Where you get a little bit of elbow grease in there, get a little bit of an arm workout. And be glad you have your apron on, or your right here would have stripes of wax on it. I don't normally sit down during this process, but I'm wanting to do a 5K this weekend in Lake Charles for Out of the Darkness, a suicide prevention thing, and it's important to me to try to do it, and my knee is swollen. So I'm trying not to overdo right now and make myself where I can't do something that's important to me. When you're wiping back off here, also think about where there would normally be more. Of course, in your indentations, there's going to be more. But there would also be more darkness around the edges and anywhere where greases and oils would have been if this table was picked up and handled. So we're going to leave a little extra in the corners, and we're going to leave a little extra like on the sides where it would have been normally picked up at. And those are just subtle little differences that can make it look better in the long run. A little more on your outside, and a little, so we're going to scrub a little more through the center. Make that a little more white. Probably somebody would have had a doily up there or something like that that protected that surface from aging. Maybe their lamp sat there, or something of that nature. I believe that's where that needs to be, and we're going to take this little one through these crevices a tad. There's what the top of that one's going to look like. And I'm now going to do the top of the big one and then come back and get the legs. I'm excited about getting, see if I can lift this up where you can see. Inside this detail here, you'll make sure and get real dark in there because a lot of dust and grime and shadows and things like that would accumulate in there. You're going to leave extra underneath where a shadow would be, coming down underneath any areas like that. We're going to leave extra in the, can you see the turns of the legs? I'm going to go through with the gray and put it inside each of the turns of the legs and underneath the bottom of that. And then there's a small crevice here. Both of those will get the deep gray, and then I'll go over that with the custom tan color and get that on, and hopefully be done with that part of these today. Then they're going to need to be buffed again tomorrow, and then they're going to need to sit and cure, you know, at least probably a couple of weeks and 30 days to be fully cured and ready to use things on. So if you have any questions, or if you have a project you're working on, I would love to see pictures, and thanks for spending time with me. Bye.